Hang Gliding Flight School is a free educational resource created to share the fun and adventure of flying by encouraging, teaching, and inspiring aviators of all ages. Aviation videos provide a supplement, never a replacement, for face-to-face, in-person training with qualified teachers. Visit www.hangglidingflightschool.com for a map of nearly 40 flight instructors in the USA.
Good day, aviators, and welcome to another episode of Hang Gliding Flight School. My name is Eric, and this episode of Hang Gliding Flight School is going to answer the most fundamental of questions about the sport. What is hang gliding? Many people are familiar with the term hang gliding, but they don't actually know what it means. The uninitiated often confuse hang gliding with other sporting aeronautics like paragliding and parasailing. And they don't really know the difference between these different forms of aviation. So, by the end of this video, you will know a little history about the sport of hang gliding and the differences between various types of recreational aircraft. So, the aircraft you see behind me, those are hang gliders. And in the simplest terms,
hang gliding is a form of recreational aviation invented during the 1960s and popularized during the 1970s in the USA and Australia. Hang gliders are unpowered recreational aircraft with a delta wing airfoil and a triangular control frame mounted just beneath the center of gravity of the airframe.
Many people mistakenly think that hang glider pilots are holding themselves up with their arms, right, and hanging off the glider, right? This is not true at all. The full body weight of a hang glider pilot is suspended in a harness, and the harness attaches to the center of the aircraft, hence the term hang glider.
Pilots did hang by their arms on those early 70s gliders, but they had harnesses by the mid-70s. Now, notice how the hang strap tightens on a modern glider and lifts my body weight as I launch. The harness suspends me and carries all my weight beneath the aircraft.
We do use our arms to steer and control the glider, but not to hold ourselves up. In fact, a hang glider pilot can completely let go of the control bar, and the glider will still fly because their weight is held in the harness, not by their arms, okay?
Incidentally, the people who fly hang gliders are hang glider pilots, and the aircraft itself is a hang glider. The first time I ever met a pilot when I was a teenager, I said to him, "Oh, I've always wanted to talk to a hang glider." And he pointed at the aircraft and said, "Well, there's a hang glider. You can talk to it all you want. I'm a pilot." And ever since that guy corrected me as a teenage boy, I make sure that I correct everybody else. We are pilots. We are not aircraft.
Now, the most common methods of launching a hang glider into the air are foot launching by running down an inclined slope,
which you can see me doing here on a small training hill at the beach. This is what we work on before we go to larger hills and mountains.
Or aero towing by pulling the aircraft into the sky with an ultralight, much like a sailplane gets towed into the air with a propeller plane.
As you see here, the glider just sits atop a three-wheeled cart, and once it reaches enough airspeed, it simply lifts off and gets pulled into the air by the tow plane. Now, the tow plane is usually an ultralight, and those look something like this, which is called a Muss Dragonfly, one of the most common ultralights used for aero towing.
The general public tends to be very misinformed about the nuances of hang gliding.
For example, when a pilot is learning how to foot launch, they start on small training hills like these, only a few feet above the ground, for a very short distance.
Now, since most hang gliding shown on television and in movies are these amazing flights launching from mountaintops, people often presume student pilots are running off mountains on their first day. And no, that's not what happens. It requires months of practice on little training hills before you even consider flying off a mountain by yourself.
you can foot launch off a mountain on your first day with a qualified instructor. This type of flight is called a tandem flight and is a great way to be introduced to the sport. But no student is doing solo launches off a mountain on their first day. Now, the same thing applies to aero towing. As a beginner, you won't be doing a solo aero tow on your first day. Instead, you will take several tandem aero tow flights with an instructor before you learn to pilot the aircraft by yourself. So, how did hang gliding get started in the first place? And what is a little history of the sport? Well, as I'm sure you know, from basic science classes back in grade school, lots of people have tried for centuries to build all kinds of machines to allow humanity to live out our oldest dream of flight. And it's impossible to pin the credit on any one individual. In truth, the creation of hang gliding was a series of inventions and adventures, refined and perfected by numerous men and women. There is no one person who gets the credit. It's a collaborative effort between many pioneering people in numerous countries. Again, as you may recall from history class, Italian inventor and artist Leonardo da Vinci sketched over 200 flying wings in the 1480s, the most famous of which was called the ornithopter. Now, with our modern understanding of aerodynamics, most of his sketches were impractical and would never fly. However, some replicas of his designs have been constructed and successfully flown. So, did Leonardo da Vinci build the first hang glider? Did he construct a wing and fly it himself? Well, we will never know. However, we do know that German engineer Otto Lilienthal was inspired by da Vinci, and Mr. Lilienthal successfully built and flew his own glider in 1891, hundreds of times. In fact, his flights became somewhat of a tourist attraction, with people from all over Europe wanting to see this crazy German fly through the air with wings. In fact, the Wright brothers publicly credited Otto Lilienthal for influencing and inspiring their work on gliders. Unfortunately, shortly after Otto Lilienthal began to fly, the Wright brothers invented the airplane in 1903. The airplane effectively killed public interest in hang gliding. I mean, who wants to glide a few feet off the ground from a hill when you can get in an airplane and fly to the next town or the next state? Hang gliding disappeared until 1951, when an American engineering couple named Gertrude and Francis Rogallo invented a kite-winged aircraft while working for NASA. The original intent was to use the wing as a spacecraft recovery system for Mercury program re-entry maneuvers. NASA experimented with the idea, but ultimately decided on an ordinary parachute. Now, after the wing was rejected by NASA, the Rogallo couple published and distributed their plans to the public. In 1961, a young man in California named Barry Palmer, who was also an engineer for NASA, saw a photograph of a Rogallo wing in a magazine and built his own glider based on the image. There is documented proof of Barry Palmer flying his Rogallo wing in 1961, something which no one else had done successfully or repeatedly using this new aircraft design. Now, the next group of very important innovators and pioneers were from Australia. First, we have a man named John Dickinson, who created a Rogallo wing for use behind ski boats called a ski kite in 1963. Ski kiting became a popular tourist attraction at water shows. Now, this popularity led two other Australian men, Mike Burns and Dick Swinburne, to create a company called Aerostructures, which began to manufacture a commercial ski kite called a ski wing in 1966. Next, we have Australians Bill Bennett and Bill Moyes. These gentlemen began to take the Aerostructures ski kite on tour around the world and show it off outside of Australia. In 1967, Bill Moyes founded what is today the oldest hang glider manufacturing company in the world, Moyes Delta Gliders. 6 years later, in 1973, brothers Bob and Chris Wills founded Wills Wing, the first hang glider manufacturer in the United States. During those initial years, Moyes Delta Gliders and Wills Wing were making variations of the triangular Regalo wing, which has the shape of a kite. Now, the Delta wing shape that we see on gliders today, looking more like a military bomber with a pilot flying prone, was invented in 1976 by a French hang glider manufacturer called La Mouillette, founded by brothers Gerard and Jean-Marc Thevenot. Their aircraft was called the Atlas and still serves as the dominant airfoil shape, used over 40 years later. So there you have it. Who invented hang gliding? Well, Leonardo da Vinci of Italy sketched some of the first hang gliders. Otto Lilienthal of Germany gets credit for being the first person to document consistent flights. Gertrude and Francis Regalo of the USA get credit for bringing the idea of hang gliding back to the world. Barry Palmer of the USA gets credit for being the first foot-launch hang glider pilot on a Regalo wing. John Dickinson of Australia gets credit for creating the first commercially available Regalo wings. Bill Moyes of Australia gets credit for creating the first commercial hang glider company. The Wills brothers of the USA get credit for selling the first hang gliders in the United States. The Thevenot brothers of France get credit for creating the modern hang glider configuration. So like I said at the start, this sport has evolved over time, and many innovators are responsible for what it has become. There isn't a singular individual who can be credited with inventing hang gliding. Hang gliding culminated over many years through a series of people who were constantly improving designs which came before them. Now that you know a little history of hang gliding, let's talk about sports which are not hang gliding, such as trikes, paragliders, paramotors, parasailing, wingsuits, and sailplanes. So let's take a quick look at each one. So trikes are often confused for hang gliders because they do use a wing that's very similar to a hang glider. A trike is in essence a motorized glider utilizing a seat and propeller engine mounted behind the pilot. Now, the seat and engine can be mounted in a simple tubular frame or within an enclosed fiberglass fuselage. Now, whether utilizing a simple trellis tube frame or a more fancy fuselage, they are still considered a trike. In fact, there are companies offering tours flying over places like Hawaii and Lake Tahoe in trikes, which they incorrectly advertise as hang glider flights. Now, paragliders are often confused for hang gliders. Paragliders are also unpowered recreational aircraft, but they have an elliptical wing airfoil and a seated control pod mounted on paracord lines just beneath the center of gravity of the wing. People who don't know anything about air sports, they always end up calling this parasailing, no matter how many times you end up correcting them. Now, paramotors are paragliders with a large motorized propeller mounted to the back of the pilot. Now, not only does this allow pilots to remain aloft for longer periods of time, but it also allows them to launch from flat surfaces like a field. Parasails are just really parachutes, typically pulled behind a boat on a really long tow line. Now, parasails are usually used as a form of recreation for tourists, as they really require no skill or training to use. So when your grandparents go on vacation and they tell you that they saw hang gliders off of a boat, they probably saw parasailing. Wingsuits are a uniform worn on the body which creates a nylon web between the legs and arms, turning a human being into a glorified flying squirrel. So wingsuits fly at immensely high speeds since the flight is essentially just falling. Wingsuit pilots must land with a parachute because their airspeed is so fast. Wingsuiting is probably the most thrilling and dangerous of all air sports. Sailplanes are unpowered aircraft with a full cockpit like a traditional airplane. Sailplanes are the most expensive and complicated of all these aircraft, and they are far closer to an airplane than a hang glider. Sailplanes get towed into the sky by standard airplanes such as a Cessna or Piper Cub. For some reason, all of these sports are often mislabeled as hang gliding by the general public. Even the mainstream media routinely use the wrong jargon. They frequently transpose words and nomenclature, flippantly dismissing their ignorance as though it's all the same thing. That's like insisting stagecoaches and skateboards are identical because each have 4 wheels. You know that hot air balloon pilots and fighter pilots do not possess interchangeable skills. Flying a P-51 is not the same as flying a 747.
What flying experience have you had?
Oh, I flew single-engine fighters in the Air Force, but this plane has 4 engines. It's an entirely different kind of flying, altogether.
It's an entirely different kind of flying.
Likewise, recreational aircraft are not interchangeable. They are different vehicles with different names, requiring different piloting skills.
There you have it, my fellow aviators. Now you know a brief history of how hang gliding started, what hang gliding is, and, just as importantly, you know what hang gliding isn't. And, if you happen to know people who don't know a hang glider from a parasail or a parasol, you could send them this video, and maybe they'll learn something. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Hang Gliding Flight School. Be sure to check out the Hang Gliding Flight School website to find a map of nearby instructors who will train you to become a hang glider pilot. And remember, my friends, in the words of Ray Bradbury, you've got to jump off cliffs all the time and build your wings on the way down.